After the date, we drove around San Jose.
Oh, looking for
your car, because part of it was I didn't want to say bye to him yet, and so I was like, hey, like, let's walk to our cars together. And then when we were at my car, I was like, where did you park? And he was like, actually, I don't know. And so to kind of like extend time to hang out with him, we drove around, still couldn't find the car, and then he like texted me like 20 minutes later, like, I finally found it. And I did like a whole walking tour of what we drove. My name is Jessa. I am from San Jose. I went to San Jose State and love the community around the area, especially Nirvana Soul.
My name's Willy Lee. I grew up in Palo Alto, and then went to school on the East Coast for about 5 years and was working there for a couple of years, and then came back to the Bay Area because I wanted to be back in the community. We like to go visit lots of different cafes and coffee shops and bookstores. So I think that's meeting at Nirvana. That was probably one of the interests that we shared together, was going to a lot of different cafes.
Yeah. So I think that I've never heard his side of the story, so I'm curious to hear what he thinks, but I can paint how it was from my side. So we actually first met on Hinge, and he messaged me asking like, hey, do you have any like cool coffee shops in your area that you really like going to? And I kind of wanted to show him something cool to kind of like represent San Jose, but also to make him think that I was cool. So I was like, yeah, Nirvana Soul. And so we got there. I remember ordering a honey lavender latte. I don't remember what you ordered, but I do remember Mar was working, Mar at the bar. And so I was just like, oh, like this is also my friend Mar. Really trying to like boost up the, like how cool he might think I am. And then I remember we sat upstairs, and the way I used to set up dates back then was that I would tell people like, oh, I only have like 30 minutes or an hour, and then I have errands to run. And I remember sitting up there with him, and I think we were there for like an hour and a half to 2 hours, and he actually reminded me like, hey, don't you have somewhere to go? And I was like, actually, no, we can hang out for a little longer.
We both met on Hinge, but we worked at the same company. So we both were working at Deloitte at the time, and that's how we, I think we originally found similarity, was that we were both quitting at the same time. So I worked out of the DC office, and then I was quitting, and then she was in the San Jose office, and she was also quitting like a couple months after me. And so we were bonding over our experience there. And I guess similar to how she had habits of dating or processes, I always go in with the zero expectation. And so I just assumed that we would be friends, if nothing else. And so I rolled up with flip-flops and shorts. And she had actually dressed up. And I think she had said that she came from like a work meeting, and that's why she had dressed up kind of more nicely. To, I think, not make me feel so bad about wearing flip-flops and shorts to dates. I got lost, and because I don't go to downtown San Jose that often, I didn't want to tell her that it took me like 20 to 30 minutes to go find my car.
I'm going to add on to that. After the date, we drove around San Jose.
Oh, looking for
your car, because part of it was I didn't want to say bye to him yet, and so I was like, hey, like, let's walk to our cars together. And then when we were at my car, I was like, where did you park? And he was like, actually, I don't know. And so to kind of like extend time to hang out with him, we drove around, still couldn't find the car. And then he like texted me like 20 minutes later, like, I finally found it. And I did like a whole walking tour of what we drove. I'd been to Nirvana quite a bit, actually. So I was part of that super long line that was waiting outside. And then afterwards, it was the place that I would go to with my best friends. So we'd go to farmers markets and then hang out at Nirvana. And then a lot of my coworkers and I, because I used to be an accountant before I left, we'd go to Nirvana to like pump out spreadsheets because the energy just like really excited us and made us feel alive. And so for me, I always associated Nirvana with like a really happy and vibrant place. So it just felt fitting, like potentially something starting new, happening at somewhere that has so much energy and like love there.
That was my first time at Nirvana. But I had gone to like a lot of cafes on the West Coast or just in the Bay Area. But I always really liked like the colors and branding of Nirvana. So we go back there pretty often.
It kind of transitioned at first because this was our first time meeting in person and because we worked at the same place. I was getting the vibe from him like this was a business meeting. And I think like to give context, at Deloitte, they give us like corporate cards. And when you like meet another Deloitte person, it doesn't matter what office they're from, you can kind of like expense whatever you're doing, like if it's a meal or coffee, to the company for the sake of like networking or professional development. So when we were ordering, he like pulls out a card and I was like, no, like we can split these or half these. He goes, I'm gonna expense it to networking. And I was like, okay, this is a networking event, that's fine. And then when we started talking more, he told me about like the nonprofits that he worked with, or personal projects he worked on. And then I remember at one point he was telling me about his family because his brother was getting married the day after. And so I was like, whoa, like tell me about your family. And I think at one point he made a comment kind of like, he was talking about his family in New York. And I grew up in New York, and he was like, yeah, like you'd have to meet them sometime. And I remember thinking in the back of my head, I was like, I really do want to meet them. Like, that's going to happen. So I don't know. I think there were times during the date where I was like going into it with low expectations. And then throughout it, I was like, okay, this guy's really cool. Like, I'm getting hooked.
I don't really remember everything we talked about. You have a way better memory about this stuff than I do. But I just remember it was really good, like getting to learn more about you, since I feel like we had talked a lot online, but we had never talked about anything personal. So it was a lot of like learning your interests, and you had a really interesting story of like why you were leaving and that you wanted to find something that was really true to you and who you were. And that was a lot of the reason why you were leaving Deloitte. And so it was cool to hear somebody who was like genuinely trying to be like their whole self. And I think that's pretty rare in the Bay Area, to find somebody who like can tune out all the stuff that's kind of around them and say like, I want to do something that's true to who I am, and pursue that with everything they have.
I think we've been together for 2.5 years now, approaching 2.5 years. In those 2.5 years, I think we've done a lot of cool stuff. We've recently just got back from an international trip. So he met my family in the Philippines. We did some fun island hopping. We have a cat, and we have 5 cats now, technically, because she gave birth to 4. And we are co-founders for a startup too.
It's called Devo because it's short for devotion. And so devotion for brands, and being able to share that with your friends and family, and have it be very like hyper localized, is something that we're trying to figure out how best to do. One of the things we have thought a lot about is like loyalty and like loyalty programs, and how loyalty programs are supposed to be used to like get people connected to brands, but it's also like a community aspect, like meeting other people. And so we've always wanted to make loyalty more of like a social thing.
So I think he's my soulmate, just to put that out there. But I remember getting out of my car during our date, or like right before our date, and I was like walking to Nirvana, and I was like, what if like this is the guy that ends up being like the one? And then I see him outside of Nirvana, and he is in basketball shorts and flip-flops, and I was like, nah, absolutely not. Like, this is not the one. And then I think talking to him that day made me realize, like, actually, like, he's a really great guy. And then as, like, we got to know each other, I think in the beginning I realized, like, he is sweet. He's very, like, considerate of my feelings and other people. He's really ambitious. And then I thought, like, in the beginning, like, oh, these are characteristics of a great person. I think over the years we've realized that we are very opposite people, but in a way we work really well as a team. And so I think soulmates, I think the serendipity of meeting someone who can be your soulmate is definitely a thing that happens, but I think you learn to be the other person's other half over time and with experience. So it's both chance and effort, in my opinion.
I don't know if I've ever believed in the idea of soulmates, but I think I believe in the idea of, you know, when it's right. And so I think I've always gone into relationships with like being very committed, which is why I think when we first met, I was like, oh, it's just friends. But then I think as I got to know her, I was like, hey, like, I think it's just right. And I think it was like I had only been back to the Bay Area for like a couple months, and I think we just jumped into a relationship pretty soon after. So I think it's one of those things where it's like, hey, if it feels right, then you should just go for it and commit to it. And it's been 2.5 years later, and I don't have any regrets about it.
I think coffee shops are a great place to connect with people because it gives you a very low pressure environment to talk about yourself. And then I think especially in Nirvana, there's so much to talk about. You can talk about the art on the wall, and that bridges your interest into art. You can talk about like the flavor of the coffee and why you like that. And I think it just gives you a lot of talking points. And because there are so many other people, you don't feel like I'm being interrogated by this person, or like, in case it's a bad date, you can always exit. Not to say like you can't do that elsewhere, but it just seems like it's very casual and allows you to like be yourself with no pressure.
I think coffee shops are special because they're all very unique in their own way. I think similar to how everybody wants to roast coffee beans in their own type of way, or beans come from different places. It's like every coffee shop has its own personality. And so meeting people, even if it's one Nirvana versus like another Nirvana, like each of them has its own kind of special personality. And so I think going to a coffee shop is almost like an experience within itself.
I would say just do it, because worst case scenario, you and them don't work out. At least you get to enjoy a cup of coffee for yourself as a little treat for being brave and doing things that make you uncomfortable. Best case scenario is you meet someone that you really click with, and that's the start of a very long and very happy story. Oh, Nirvana Soul's music taste. I think that's something that he and I talked about. I think there were times where I was so nervous that I didn't know what to say, and then a really good song would come on and I would just like dance to myself, and so that calmed me down a lot. So if you're nervous about a first date, go to Nirvana Soul, because I think if anything, they'll make you feel very at home, so you don't have to feel like you're performing or being someone you're not.